Welcome back to the Connected Teamwork Summit. I'm your co-host Hilke Farber, and we're about to go into a conversation with Eddie Baez. Eddie, how are you today?
I'm doing really well today. Thank you, Hilke, for the opportunity to be here.
It's amazing to have you here. Before we step into the conversation with you, Eddie, we're going to do a brief review of today and talk about this next moment, team-defining moment. We're going to think about hurt and ask ourselves, how do you build connectedness when people are hurting? What struck me from the four amazing speakers today when we talked about about managing commitments, about feedback and coaching, about conflict, and about how do we work with undiscussables and setbacks and stretches. This common theme of how important it is to open ourselves to the broader situation, to care for others. I'm thinking about Yvonne's question. So what else? What else is true here for you? And now we're going to have this conversation with Eddie to look at this, what I call a black belt moment. When people are hurting, how do we build connectedness in that time? Eddie, I met a couple of months ago, and I was struck by how caring and clear he is in his commitment to the good for all. And that comes also across when I look at his resume. He's a born Puerto Rican, raised in the Bronx, New York. He's currently a large enterprise account executive for the Customer Service and Support Division Center of Gartner. And before that, he was a top performing sales consultant for IBIS World Industry Research. He was there a top sales performer of the year for 3 consecutive years. And he also is in his outside of 9 to 5 time, president of the New York, New Jersey chapter of the National Sales Network, NSN, which is a organization dedicated to the advancement of underrepresented sales professionals across the US. He's also the former CEO and co-founder of CareerPipe PBC, which is a social enterprise focused on leading underserved young adults to financial independence. So much care for the larger collective. Eddie is happily married to his college sweetheart. Is it Gigi?
That's right.
And he grew up across the street from the Yankee Stadium in the Bronx.
Go Yankees.
Go Yankees. Go Yankees. We're going to talk about this more. And he also worked on a book called Teams Win Championships with 5 other co-authors. His purpose is to give 100% of himself, the greatest good of the greatest number of people. And he loves traveling and seeing the world from other lenses besides the ones that he grew up in. And I think he enjoys that lens as well. So Eddie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
You are very welcome. So with you, we're going to talk about this topic of hurt. And I remember in our preparation conversation, I asked you, Eddie, which one do you want to focus on in the conversation? You said, yeah, I'll pick hurt. So tell us why you wanted to talk about hurt and connectedness today.
Yep, absolutely. I think before I do, I just want to issue a quick disclaimer. So all the personal views that I'm sharing with you today are my own, not that of Gartner or its constituents. And fair warning, I'm not classically HR trained or have any kind of psychological accreditation. I'm just someone with a bit of real world experience and a lot of compassion for people going through tough times. And to answer your question directly, when you came to me with this topic, I honestly felt like it was something that isn't talked about enough at work, both for the people going through struggles, going through challenging moments, and also for leadership and how to work through that. I know that there's some level of training in some organizations, but not every organization is going to dedicate the same amount of time and resourcing around it. So I personally experienced the loss of my father about a year and a half ago,
Mm.
and it was still very recent. It was waves of grief I had never felt before in my life, and I felt like it was just a very challenging conversation to have at work. I honestly had never had to navigate that, let alone have other people navigate it for me as well. So um, immediately I was drawn to the topic.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that vulnerably right off the bat. And thank you, Eddie. So, and I will stay away from sports metaphors in this conversation, even though you grew up across from that stadium. So, let's talk about this for a second. So, in these last 18 months or so since your dad's passing, what have you learned about how to work with hurt and stay connected to yourself, others, and your purpose at work? What have you been learning?
I think the biggest thing for me is we never come out of hurt or grief the same person.
Hmm.
I think it profoundly changes us. I think it is part of our evolution as humans, as people. And I think you have to be patient with yourself
Hmm.
in that journey, in that process. I think it's the part of your journey that you probably know the least about, and probably is the most rewarding, if you
Hmm.
care to give it time.
Hmm.
I also think it for leaders, thank you to the people that were there for me, first of all, because there were a lot of people that were very patient with me, that put themselves second, put me first, and
Hmm.
were brave enough to be vulnerable, to share their own feelings, to call me on the weekends and make sure that I was okay,
Hmm.
and to put my performance aside for a moment and make sure that that I was okay emotionally, spiritually, just making sure that I was okay. And the patience is twofold, for yourself and for the people around you, to be patient while you figure out who that other person on the other side of the grief is going to be.
Yes, yes, yes. So, how did you and how do you cultivate patience for yourself? How did you and how did it start? Because I love what you said earlier. Grief is probably one of those things that we're least experienced in and yet can be most rewarding. So, can you say more about how have you been learning the muscle of patience?
Hmm. Well, um, I'll start off by saying a lot of reading. I actually got a life coach, and he was helping me through the grief, helping me with developing and cultivating good habits around my health, behaviors around gym and eating. That was extremely important. And he was the one that really taught me to put myself first above everyone else, because without Eddie, there is no family to take care of. There is no travel to be had. There is no, wife to come home to. So, that is part of it, being selfish in your own recovery and your own health.
Mm.
And there's a lot of different difficult moments. It's not just grieving a lost parent, right? Surviving traumatic events, living with mental health challenges, facing financial hardship. There's so many.
Mm. Mm.
And in preparation for this, I was actually watching a conversation between Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper.
Mhm.
And Colbert recites some J.R.R. Tolkien,
Mhm.
and it goes something to the effect of, life is a gift, and existence is a gift, but
Mm.
with existence comes suffering. And what you learn through that is that you learn to love the thing you most wish had not happened, because what punishments of God are not gifts, to quote Colbert.
Mm.
And it's a segue to what I was going to say.
Mm.
My faith, I had a renewed sense of faith a renewed sense of purpose, a renewed sense of self.
Mm,
I felt like the people around me were having real conversations with me. I was
mm,
piercing behind the veil. There was no
mm,
just
mm,
pleasantries or just corporate lingo. Like people are their most human when people go through grief, because it's the one thing that evens the playing field for everyone.
mm,
And I think along that journey, along that process, the patience comes from understanding the
mm,
thing that happened, understanding who you become in relation to that thing, understanding that there are people there that want to help, that know
mm,
what that pain feels like.
mm,
And in that same interview, Colbert says, through the suffering, you learn to love more, to be more compassionate, to be more
mm,
patient with the people who are going through those things. And I can say from my own person that is 100% true,
mm,
and that I love deeper. I give more, because
mm,
now I understand what that suffering feels like and means
mm,
to other people.
mm,
And I want them to not feel alone or have to feel like they have to navigate it in isolation. So the
mm,
patience comes with time spent discovering yourself,
mm,
taking care of yourself, and understanding that suffering in relation to others.
mm. Thank you. Thank you for that. What do you find the most challenging or the hardest, or amongst the hardest about hurt, or in particular this hurt with your dad passing?
I think up front it was acceptance, right?
Mm,
Anybody who asked me during the time would know that my big thing was like, I wish I had 5 more minutes with my dad just to say
mm,
how much I love you.
mm,
I think there was a lot that happened after the fact, things you don't think about, like having to manage a book of business, or in my case, I became the president for the New York, New Jersey chapter of the National Sales Network. I had given them my commitment and my word, and it wasn't something I felt like I could back away from.
mm,
And so I think the hardest thing was having to be vulnerable all the time, having to let people know up front how I was doing in every moment, in every way, so that
mm,
they knew what to expect and how I was showing up for them and for myself.
mm,
And
mm,
that could be exhausting. I didn't
mm,
realize how exhausting, but
mm,
I think it's important.
mm,
And
mm,
and I'm not saying you have to do it every minute of every day, but I think that the more genuinely authentic you are about how you're feeling
mm,
during those challenging moments, and you
mm,
communicate it to your team, people step up. There's a quote by Les Brown, look not upon a person for who they are today, look upon the person for who they have the opportunity to become, and they will
mm,
rise to the occasion. And in every opportunity, in every moment of those conversations with my team members at NSN, all the volunteers at National Sales Network, nobody disappointed me at any point in time. They all
mm,
rose to the occasion, and they were there to support me, support the
mm,
cause, support the business. And at work, my managers stepped in. They looked at resourcing to figure out how to back me up, support me in conversations with clients. And it was difficult letting go, like, and
mm,
just delegating, and being okay with my results being, dependent on other people. I'm,
mm.
I'm very A-type, and that was not something I was ever okay with.
Uh-huh.
It was either Eddie did it or Eddie did not.
Uh-huh.
And I think, going back to the Stephen Colbert point, I learned it's not about Eddie. It's not about the ego. It's
Mm,
about my relation to the people around me. And
mm,
they showed up for me in
mm.
ways I never could have fathomed. So,
I want to explore this more in a second after we take a short break about how you chose to be that vulnerable at work, for example, at Gartner. Maybe think about a specific instance where you might have had some doubt, as I can imagine you might have had to do that, and what you did and what was the impact of that. I would love to explore that more because I think it's such a pivotal choice point that those of us who experience hurt currently probably face. So see you after the break. We're going to talk more with Eddie Baez, who's a large enterprise account exec for the customer service support division of Gartner in a second, more about hurt and how to share it at work. See you after the break. So yeah, Eddie, share about these choices that you make. Maybe moments where you decided and maybe had some doubt. Will I share this with them today? Share us about that.
Yeah. So immediately when you said that, one particular instance stood out. So I was at a kickoff, and most people kind of had heard through the grapevine that I was going through something, but didn't quite know what it was. And it was my opportunity to share. And um, it wasn't just my dad's passing. I also learned some things about my family structure, had a bit of an identity crisis, a whole host of things. And as they say, life can come at you really hard sometimes and throw some really big curveballs. And um, I basically met with some of the folks one on one. And I remember one conversation in particular where one of my colleagues said, "Wow, I never thought in a million years I'd be having this kind of conversation about this at work. I can see a time where this was highly unprofessional to speak about." And it struck a chord for me, because I was like, why, in what universe should this, or why would this be, something that is not allowed, or
Mm,
shouldn't be talked about. And shortly after that, they started opening up about their own struggles and challenges.
mm,
One other person shared about illnesses that they were battling that I didn't even know about, and what that journey looked like for them. And I think it inherently built a lot of trust amongst the team, the people that I shared it with.
mm,
I think it gave them grounds to be vulnerable back and reciprocate, and
mm,
share what they're going through.
mm,
And from that experience, I learned that it's important, even if you are scared. And I'm not saying, I'm not advocating, to force people to have to be vulnerable, but I will invite folks, no matter how scary it is. You might see that on the receiving end, or on the opposite side, you have people reflecting a lot of what you're feeling and just not talking about it.
yeah. I see the reciprocity that you invite by going first and realizing that the aloneness you thought you were in actually was just imagined. Uh,
That's right.
so I want to know more about. Did you have any doubt about sharing?
Absolutely. All the time, especially in the face of leadership.
Yes.
Um,
How'd you deal with that, and what was going on in your mind?
my first few thoughts were, am I going to lose face? Am I just not being tough enough? Am I just not um adhering to being, to keeping the personal out of work? And you
Mm,
know why would I at this stage in my career? And on the opposite side, when I was weighing out the pros and cons about opening up and being vulnerable, I also realized that if my performance dips, if I'm suddenly not the Eddie that they're accustomed to, with no rhyme or reason, no context, I feel like that would hurt both the business more and my management team more, because like in any healthy relationship, communication is king.
mm,
And I think this is no different, right? And if they expect results from me and they expect me to perform at my best, they need to know when I'm at my worst. And so when I weighed
mm,
that out, that's when I made the decision. I started with my manager, then I went up to the skip level and I talked to him as well. He knew what was going on, um, and they surprised me. My manager was jumping in on client calls. He was moving things around for me. He pushed me to take days off,
mm.
um, and he also provided mental health and well-being resources that I didn't even know existed.
Wow.
So I think not only was I pleasantly surprised by their response, but I think I owed it to them and to myself to be honest about where I was at in that moment.
I owed it to myself to be honest to myself in them in that moment, and that helped them understand where you were at and what they could count on. Was it a particular way in which you shared about this?
During one-on-ones, I felt like this isn't a conversation you have in a group.
Mm-hmm.
I also prefaced a lot, right? Before I talk about this today, I want you to know that, it took me a long time to get to this point to be able to share this with you, and let you know that it is a difficult conversation that I'm not accustomed to navigating.
Mm,
um, and I hope you can give me permission to share this because the personal is starting to bleed into the professional, and it's important for me to share because I think it will in some way, shape, or form affect you just as much as it'll affect me. And by
Mm.
doing it that way, they invited me to share, right? So I was asking for permission to be vulnerable and permission to be my true self in that
Mm.
dialogue and share what was going on.
I love how you create the context first before you got in there with them, and you asked for permission by creating a context together. Uh, did anybody say no? Not now.
Everybody was immediately receptive, and um, like I said, I think I was pleasantly surprised by how accepting everybody was. And the more they shared their stories, the more I realized it's more common than I ever thought. And
Mm.
and again, it's not just the loss of a parent. There were so many stories that came out of these conversations and these one-on-ones that I never expected to have.
So now reflecting back, even though I imagine you're still in it, 18 months in, how have, has this time of processing hurt uh, informed how you lead and work today?
Yeah. So I think delegation was never part of um my library of words or things that I was accustomed to doing.
Right.
Um, I remember having multiple conversations with my wife about having to let go and having to let others lead my life for me. And I know that
Mm.
sounds terrifying, but I promise you, for anybody who's listening, um, when you surrender
Mm.
truly and honestly to the idea that other people do care about you and that they're going to show up for you in the ways that you need them to, they will.
Mm.
And again, shout out to my volunteers at National Sales Network, my ELT board, to my friends, family, anybody who was there. I met some new family members along the way, John Jr. Um, People show up for you. They really do. And
Mm.
I think the biggest change for me was just feeling safe,
Mhm.
feeling comfortable, knowing that other people will look out for me in the best way possible.
Mm.
Um, and that delegation is a necessary part of growing up. And
Mm.
sometimes you want to never relinquish that perceived control, but it's necessary for your
Yeah.
growth.
Surrendering into accepting that people are there for you. And that's something that happened inside of you that you practice now as a leader, and then allowing yourself to delegate. So, what would you say to somebody who is maybe in the beginning of their grief cycle, of their hurt cycle, and they haven't talked to anybody yet at work, and that's just not part of the culture, at least from what people might understand is the culture around them? What would you say to them?
I'd say number one, take stock of where you are, take stock of what you need, be selfish in your healing. Um, to me, putting myself first was never something that I was capable of, never something that I ever wanted to do. And as a result, my health declined. I was having anxiety and panic attacks, things that I had never had in my vocabulary. Um, and my wife was always the person hurting the most in response to that because she was the one that was there with me 24/7, having to witness it all happen. And because I didn't put myself first, it never seemed to end. And then when I finally did, and I pattern interrupted, and I put myself first, started going to the gym, started practicing meditation, started doing box breathing, started doing all these different frameworks and techniques to help with my healing and grieving process, was when I started to see a pretty big change in myself. So number one, put yourself first and figure out what it is that you need. Seek
Mm.
out help. I got the life coach. My wife actually was the one who put me in contact with the life coach. Lean into your support system. You're not the only
Mm.
one going through it.
Mm.
My brother Leo, my mother Myra, it was a collective hurt.
Mm.
Leo and I had some really tough conversations. We would go to the grave with my dad, and it would just be me, my brother, and my dad's grave. And you know, um, that was support in and of itself.
Mm.
We didn't even
Mm.
have to say much, but just being in each other's presence was enough. So again, put yourself first, find out what you need, lean into your support system. And I think also, read. um, Seven Spiritual Laws of Success helped me a ton. One of my colleagues at work also recommended um, the Wisdom of Sundays by Oprah Winfrey. Um,
Mm,
it was instrumental in my healing process, so I recommend
mm,
both.
mm. How did reading help you in that process?
Yeah, so I'm not the first, nor will I ever be the last person to go through suffering and grief. And like much of my sales success has been 100% attributed to reading from the greats, reading from the giants that preceded me. I feel that this is no different. Anything in life that has been felt has been read or written, and I
Mm,
feel like
mm,
it's been pondered on for millennia. And if there's somebody out there who has already, been on the other side, has been on the other side and then some, and has had the time to have the hindsight that I wish I had in that
mm,
moment, they've
mm,
already written about it. And
mm,
so
mm.
why have this be any different, right?
Beautiful. So now, as a leader of others, when you intuit somebody is hurting, how do you approach that on your team?
Yeah. I think number one, making it safe for them to share,
Mhm,
leading with vulnerability first, asking for permission to be vulnerable, setting the context and setting the stage for that conversation. And once permission is granted, and once you have cultivated that, um, I think as Matt Oppenheimer said in yesterday's session, that psychological safety that I have your back.
mm,
I think the next piece of it is having a tailored approach to what it is that they need, right? Like
mm,
have them take stock of what those things are that they need, so
mm,
that you can then reciprocate and provide resourcing around it, both,
mm.
from a business perspective, but more importantly, from a personal and emotional perspective.
Yes. So help them, first of all, create a safe space so they feel vulnerable to share. Okay, to share vulnerably, and maybe by going first also. And secondly, by helping them take stock of what they need, what they need. So if and when, I would say, you go to hurt again, uh, Eddie, because we're all humans, what's the first thing that you will not do?
That was a tough one. I'm not going to lie. That's a good that's a good one. I would not wait so long
Mm,
to let others help. I think in the beginning I had a lot of resistance to it.
mm,
Um, I was losing my mind over having to delegate and having to rescind again that perceived control.
mm.
Um, and I would just surrender sooner. Um,
Surrender sooner. Yeah.
the universe has some architecture, some divine architectures I like to call it. And I think you're exactly where you need to be at all moments of time. And if
Mm.
the sooner you put that in practice and ground yourself in that, the faster you get going with your life. And I think that's something that I probably would do sooner.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I'm taking from this so much, including hurt as a gateway into surrender. It's like I must surrender control because that's the way to work through this, to learn through it, to grow through it, and to mature through it. And you talked about the maturation in this case for you being a lot about delegation, and it sounds like trusting others to help you, which to me in this world is such a sorely needed competency that we learn to retrust each other, that we will indeed help each other. And what you're bravely to me demonstrating is that it takes a brave step from the person looking for help to ask for it and to say, this is where I'm at. Anything else that you'd like to say by way of closing, Eddie?
The biggest thing that I've benefited from in the readings is the idea of detached involvement. It's one of Deepak Chopra's biggest lessons, and it's um, being involved, controlling what you can control,
Hmm.
understanding what is perceived control and actually not controlled, and most importantly, setting the outcome or the intention in your mind of what it is that you want, and surrendering the outcome to the universe. And that's the detachment piece. Surrender the outcome to the universe. Just focus on the intention and what you want to drive forward, and the rest will fall into place.
Thank you so much, Eddie. We've been talking with Eddie Baez, who's a magnificent human being who's been teaching us about hurt. He's also a senior leader in Gartner, many other things in life, and he's been teaching us about surrender, detached involvement, and allowing for the kindness of the universe to help us. So thank you so much. I'm going to take a short break before we continue on for our final discussion of team defining moments, this time about endings and departures. Thank you, Eddie, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Hilke. Have a good one.